If it's your first time here, please feel free to sign our mailing list. We have a whole new program coming up in the spring, and you can get a copy of the schedule via email or snail mail or both. And there are also flyers out there for the upcoming events. I'm just going to say a couple of things about those. Next week we've got Latino immigrant health and access to healthcare services. And then, so that'll be a talk, and then we have a performance after that on the 23rd by Elliot Findishaw, Masks Inside and Out. And we'll close the series with students presenting. So it should be really good, and we've got a very exciting program coming up for next semester as well. So today, I'm very excited to have Richard Blanco here. And I think we all know he was the 5th inaugural poet of U.S. history, the youngest. Come on down. First Latino immigrant and gay person to serve in that role. And he's the author of 3 poetry collections, Looking for the Gulf Motel, Directions to the Beach of Death, and The City of 100 Fires, plus 2 memoirs, The Prince of Coquillas, as a Miami childhood, and For All of Us, One Today, An Inaugural Poet's Journey, plus 2 commemorative chapbooks, One Today, Boston's Drum, and Matters of the Sea. Now, some of these books we have for sale, so if you want to buy them right after the reading, we're going to end a few minutes early. We'll end about 10 of, so there's time for you to go buy the book and have Richard sign it for you. And also, what I don't have here are his many awards. Too many for me to list on this little flyer, so I'm not gonna say that. But what I do want to say, on a more personal note, the first time I heard Richard read, I was watching the TV, and it was at the inauguration, and he came out and he started to read this poem, and it was like Whitman reading Song of Myself. I really felt that connection, because it talked about all the people in America coming together and making America what it is. It's a land of diversity. So I was very touched by that. And since then I've bought all of his poetry books. And they're fun books to read. They tell stories of his Cuban upbringing in Miami. I feel like you can walk in, sit down at the table with his grandma, and it could be your abuelita, it could be your bubby, it could be your nana, it could be your grandmother. They're wonderful, wonderful stories. So I encourage you to buy his books. And now for a very wonderful treat, let's welcome Richard Blanco.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. How's everybody doing? Okay. Thank you. Buenas tardes. Thanks for taking time out of your day to come here and share a few minutes with poetry and with life. I hope. I mean, if this is your first poetry reading, don't be afraid. But also, I just love. I've been doing readings now for about almost 4 years. 70% of my time is on the road. And I've realized that there's really something beautiful about when we come together in the name of literature. That something different happens whether you're reading the book at home in your pajamas on the sofa. There's something about being in community and thinking about things together and listening and being read to, and sort of there's hopefully an energy that I also get from you guys. So I thank you for being here. It's a great thrill for me to be here as well. I'm going to tell you a story, a long story, or rather a journey about my central obsession, which is the idea of home. There's, as writers say, and poets in particular say, that we're writing one poem all our lives. And that is because usually there's some kind of obsession in which all our body of work, every single poem, is in some ways trying to dimension some part of that obsession, ask questions about that obsession, answer those questions, ask new questions. And for me, that obsession is home, and all that big word calls to mind, right? asking what home is like asking what is love. And in terms of home, it means family, it means community, it means heritage, it means cultural identity, it means even in terms of sexuality. It's just a very big, big word that's central to sort of who we are as human beings, or our existence. It depends on this idea of home. And it's an obsession that began with me a long time ago, perhaps before I was even born. As I like to say, I was made in Cuba, assembled in Spain, and imported to the United States, which meant my mom left Cuba 7 months pregnant with me, and to Madrid, where I was born. And 45 days later, after I was born, we emigrated to the United States, first to New York City. So when I look back on that, it feels like somehow some higher power was going, guess what little Ricky is going to grow up and be obsessed about, this idea of home. But again, home is something that's pronounced in my life, but again, home is something universal also. I mean, we all at some point in our lives ask, where are we from? Where do we belong? Who are we in this world? And everybody sort of wants to belong to some place, someone or something, some home. So this is un recordatorio of my birth, a little memento, which adds to that script. That little newborn photo that you see there, luckily I still have the same hair. It's gray, but it's still there. Was my newborn photo, right? And that was my green card photo. So that was already part of the narrative. That was my first ID in the United States, was my debut picture. And then I remember looking at this as a little kid and asking, why the hell did they put the Eiffel Tower there in the Swiss Alps too? It's like, are they just trying to mess with me? What is that? Hell, we're from Cuba, I was born in Spain. It was all a big mess right from the beginning. And adding to that story, when we were about 4 years old, we moved to a galaxy very, very far away from New York, which was called Miami. The only place where my dad could get away wearing those Speedos. And Miami continued that obsession with home, because anybody here from Miami or lived in Miami or visited Miami, even if you've been there for an hour, you realize it's a very unique place, right? And growing up in Miami was like growing up between two sort of real imagined worlds, as I call them. One was the 1950s and 60s Cuba of my parents and my grandparents and the community at large, this country that we came from, this homeland that we lost, this place, paradise, where the sugar was sweeter and the salt was saltier and the mangoes were juicier, and the avocados, well, they're real avocados, not like the ones in the West Coast. You know what I'm saying? Like this big. So they complain about the avocados, the fruit, everything. And not unlike most of us at a young age, we roll our eyes, because it's whatever your parents are saying is like just immediate grounds for rejection, right? My brother and I would roll our eyes and go, oh God, there they go with that Cuba shit again. You know, not unlike when our parents talk about all this romantic version. But it was a little more than that. It was a place that we were supposedly going back to someday, and that was kind of the message. But it was a place that I belonged to but had never been there, wasn't even born there. So it felt so real and part of our lives, but yet so far away. And the other place, which isn't as obvious, the other real imagined place was the United States, or America. Because growing up in Miami, as we like to say in Miami, we love living in Miami because it's so close to the United States and you don't need a passport. And literally, I grew up in a very undiverse community, if that makes sense. I grew up where everybody was Cuban. 98% of my classmates were Cuban. The grocer was Cuban, the mayor was Cuban, the butcher was Cuban, the doctor was Cuban. And so that's all I saw around me. I mean, and so in a way, America was this other sort of real imagined place. And the way I contextualized it was mostly through television. That's me in the middle. For the younger generation in the crowd, if you don't know the Brady Bunch, you should. But number two, imagine this would be like the Kardashians. Imagine that's how cool it was to be the Brady Bunch. It was kind of the equivalent, well, not the same morals certainly, but but it was kind of that family that had, you know, it's a very quintessential sort of, and it was, to me, it was more than a fantasy or a misunderstanding. I just really believe that everybody north of Miami lived like this and had houses like this and acted like this. And a lot of my work stems in navigating between those two real imagined places, a lot of the early work especially. So I'm going to take you on a journey of that quest for home all the way to the end, to where we end with the moment that Shelley was talking about. about the inauguration, what that meant in terms of that. So this is the first poem, and it has to do with Thanksgiving. I thought I'd read this one since Thanksgiving is around the corner, or as my mom calls it, San-giving, or as everybody in Miami calls it, which is like San Pedro or San Ignacio. It's kind of like a saint's feast day. They're not sure what to do with Thanksgiving. This was the Thanksgiving that I grew up, fantasizing about in the real America. And this is sort of a picture of Thanksgiving at the Blancos, which inevitably turns into a lot of spandex and dancing. And actually, this was the very first poem that I was asked to write in graduate school. It was my very first assignment. We read some Whitman, some Ginsberg, some Frost, and the assignment was to write a poem about America. And I went home and scratched my head. It's like, I don't know what America these poets are talking about. And I was like freaking out. I was like, and this started this whole quest of sort of thinking about home through writing. As I say, writing makes us think, and thinking makes us write. So if you need to know one more thing for this poem, for Cubans, pork is not the other white meat. It's the only meat. It's the national meat. It's the staple of all staples. And there's a reference here to Kennedy, which deals with history and the Bay of Pigs invasion, which is why many Cubans actually turned from Democrat to Republican way back when, in the 60s, because they sort of still blame Kennedy for that failed invasion. Anyway, here we go. The poem's called America. Although Tia Miriam boasted she discovered at least half a dozen uses for peanut butter, topping for guava shells and syrup, butter substitute for Cuban toast, hair conditioner, and relaxer, Mama never knew what to make of the monthly 5-pound jars handed out by the immigration department until my friend Jeff mentioned jelly. There was always pork, though, for every birthday and wedding, whole ones on Christmas and New Year's Eve, even on Thanksgiving Day. Pork, fried, broiled, or crispy skin roasted, as well as cauldrons of black beans, fried plantain chips, and yuca, or mojito. These items required a special visit to Antonio's Mercado on the corner of 8th Street, where men in guayaberas just stood in Senate blaming Kennedy for everything. Ese hijo de puta. A pile of Cuban coffee and cigar residue filling the creases of their wrinkled lips, clinging to one another's lies of lost wealth, ashamed and empty as hollow trees. By 7, I had grown suspicious. We were still here. Over her conversations about returning to Cuba had grown wistful and less frequent. I spoke English. My parents didn't. We didn't live in a 2-story house with a maid or a wood panel station wagon, nor vacation camping in Colorado. None of the girls in my family had hair of gold. None of my brothers or cousins were named Greg, Peter, or Marcia. We weren't the Brady Bunch. And none of the black and white characters on Donna Reed or the Dick Van Dyke Show were named Guadalupe, Lázaro, or Mercedes. Patty Duke's family wasn't like us either. They didn't have pork on Thanksgiving. They ate turkey with cranberry sauce. They didn't have yuca. They had yams, like the diddles of pilgrims I colored in class. So a week before Thanksgiving, I explained to my abuelita about the Indians and the Mayflower, how Lincoln set the slaves free. I explained to my parents about the Purple Mountain's majesty, one if by land, two if by sea, the cherry tree, the Tea Party, the amber waves of grain, the masses yearning to be free, liberty and justice for all, until finally they agreed. This Thanksgiving, we would have turkey, as well as pork. Abuelita prepared the poor fowls of committing an act of treason, faking her enthusiasm for my sake. Mama set a frozen pumpkin pie in the oven and prepared candied yams, following instructions I had to translate from the marshmallow bag. The table was arrayed with gladiolas. The plattered turkey loomed at the center on plastic silver from Woolworths. I uttered a bilingual blessing, and the turkey was passed around like a game of Russian roulette. Dry, Gilberto complained, and proceeded to drown the lean slices with pork fat drippings and cranberry jelly, la mierda roja esa, as they call it. Faces fell when Mama presented her okra pie, pumpkin calabaza was a home remedy for ulcers, not a dessert. Tia Maria made 3 rounds of Cuban coffee, and then Abuelo and Pepe cleared delivering furniture, put on a Celia Cruz LP, and the entire family began to merengue over the linoleum of our apartment, sweating rum and coffee, until they remembered. It was 1972 and 46 degrees in America. Thank you. That poem was obviously from a child's sort of voice or point of view, but those questions again of home and belonging and place continue to this day. But at some point, it became very important to sort of think about, well, what is this Cuba my parents are talking? Where are they from? And what is this place that they're always talking about? And asking those questions as a way of understanding home. And those questions are particularly important for my mother. My mother left her entire family behind in Cuba. By this I mean her 7 brothers and sisters, her parents, every aunt and uncle, every niece and nephew, every cousin, every living relative. And we always so I grew up with sort of half a family, not sort of literally half a family, and sort of half a mother emotionally, because we always sort of sensed that longing and that sorrow. She wasn't always there, she was somewhere else sometimes, she was longing and sort of mourning her family. And we always admired my mother for that, admired the courage that it took to do that. When the White House called, I was actually asked to write 3 poems, not one, 3 poems in 3 weeks. And so for the 3rd poem, which I'll share with you now, I look at my mother's journey, not just about her sorrow, her longing, and her courage, but as the incredible act of faith that it must have taken for her to do that in the United States, in the American dream. And knowing and realizing that immigrants like my mother are actually more American than I could ever be for that act of faith. I don't know that I could do what she did. And she should have been the one in Washington reading that poem to the country, not me. And so this poem asks us to sort of step into my mother's emotional shoes as a way of thinking about the United States, about thinking how we can engage the United States differently, appreciate what we have. It's getting harder to say that, but I do mean it, and appreciate and not let the bad things get to us as much, and fight for those things and not give up. And we're in a democracy, I mean, still. And to fight for those things that sometimes we feel that we're blindsided to. And it takes sometimes through the eyes of an immigrant like my mother to sort of understand that. So here she is, that's one of my favorite pictures, well, it's my favorite picture ever of her in Cuba, and that's her with me at the inauguration. She's the one I chose to take with me, sat right next to me. And she wouldn't leave me alone. She's saying, like, I had a body just like Beyonce when I was her age. Beyonce was in that thing. But anyway, here we go. This is my mom. Mother country, madre patria. To love a country as if you've lost one. 1968. My mother leaves Cuba for America, a scene I imagine as standing in her place. 1 foot inside a plane destined for a country she knew only as a name, a color on a map, or glossy photos from drugstore magazines. Her other foot anchored to the platform of her patria, her hand clutched around one suitcase, taking only what she needs most. Hand-colored photographs of her family, her wedding veil, the doorknob of her house, a drawer of dirt from her backyard, goodbye letters she won't open for years. The sorrowful drone of engines, one last deep breath of familiar air she'll take with her. One last glimpse at all she'd ever known. The palm trees wave goodbye as she steps onto the plane. The mountains shrink from her eyes as she lifts off into another life to love a country as if you've lost one. I hear her. Once upon a time, reading picture books over my shoulder at bedtime, both of us learning English, sounding out words as strange as the talking animals and fair-haired princesses in their pages. I taste her first attempts at macaroni and cheese, but with chorizo and peppers. And her shame over Thanksgiving turkeys, always dry, but countered by her perfect pork and meal and garlic yuca. I smell the rain of those mornings huddled as one under one umbrella, waiting for the bus to her 10-hour days at the cash register. And at night, the zzz of her sewing her own blouses and quinceañera dresses for her grown nieces still in Cuba, guessing at their sizes. And the gowns to sell to neighbors to save for a rusty white sedan, no hubcaps, no air conditioning, sweating all the way to our first vacation to Florida theme parks, to love a country as if you've lost one, as if were you on a plane departing from America forever. Clouds closing like curtains on your country, the last scene in which you're a madman scribbling the names of your favorite flowers, trees, and birds you'd never see again. Your address and phone number you'd never use again. The color of your father's eyes and mother's hair, terrified you could somehow forget these. To love a country, as if I was my mother, last spring, hobbling, insisting I help her climb all the way up to the U.S. Capitol, as if she were here before you today, instead of me, explaining her tears, her cheeks pink as the cherry blossoms coloring the air that day, when she stopped, turned to me, and said, "You know, mijo, I've been thinking, it isn't where you're born that matters. It's where you choose to die. That's your country." So, my mother asked us a very interesting question. What is that final resting place that we would call home, both literally and figuratively, as a way of thinking about our loyalties? And I guess my mom just realized she's lived more of her life here than in Cuba, and this is home. Next slide. You can probably guess which of these three activities little gay Ricky liked to do least, right? And if you don't, you're going to be expelled as soon as you walk out of here for not knowing that answer. So there's another dimension of home for me too that has to do with my sexuality. And one is, for years I didn't come out in my writing. I wasn't sure why, but I guess I just didn't know what story to tell. And I was more focused on home in terms of cultural identity, in terms of Cuban American and all this stuff. But I also sort of, in the third book, I realized that as a gay child, as a gay teen, as a gay 20-something, wherever you are in your life, that the sense of home in terms of safe space, in terms of that dream place, and that's not just a physical place, but a place, a psychological place where you'd be able to live your life without fear and shame and all the rest, that is sort of a longing for a home too, that somewhere over the rainbow, right, kind of feeling. So that's sort of the connection to home. And then my grandmother started becoming a real big part of the story, as Shelley was mentioning. You'll meet my grandmother here, and you won't forget her. But my grandmother was a woman who was as homophobic as she was xenophobic. So anything that was culturally odd to her was also gay or queer. So oatmeal, gay. Brady Bunch, gay. What else? Anything in English, gay. Cub Scouts, gay. What was the other one? Oh, Fruit Loops, gay. So she wasn't quite off on the Fruit Loops because eventually it became the rainbow flag, but it's a woman. This is the smartest and dumbest woman I ever met in my life, I can tell you. But anyway, so it was this weird sort of mix, and I realized this idea of cultural sexuality, that you really can't separate my life growing up as a little gay kid, or feeling gay, And the cultural influence of that is part of what makes me, and it's what's part of women. That there isn't one kind of gay man, or one kind of gay woman, or one kind of trans person, but that all the stories that surround around our lives make us who we are. And that there isn't one kind of homophobia. For Latinos in general, I think we have to deal with what we call machismo, of course, which is about appearance versus, it's a different kind of homophobia that is not so much about eternal damnation and sort of religious based, even though we're Catholic as hell, but it really has to do with machismo, right? And so this is what this poem in part is talking about, appearance. It's told in the voice of my grandmother so she can incriminate herself, and this is her talking to me. And all I can say is that I hope you laugh at her and not with her on this one, so I can finally, one of the reasons we become writers is to get even. So, but you should also know, I mean, in a way, she's one of those complex people in our lives. She was also my best friend. I mean, she was my primary caretaker. So it's one of those complex people that we all have in our lives. Sometimes it's a grandmother, sometimes it's a brother, sister, an aunt, sometimes it's a parent. It's that person in your life that you hate to love and love to hate, right? Queer theory, according to my grandmother. Never drink your soda with a straw. Men don't use straws. Milkshakes? Maybe. Stop buying your mother's Avon catalog and the men's underwear and those Sears flyers. I have seen you. Stay out of her Tupperware parties and perfume bottles. Don't let her kiss you. She kisses you much too much. Avoid hugging men, but if you must, pat them real hard on the back, even if it's your father. Must you keep that cat? Don't pet him so much. Why don't you like dogs, mijo? Never play house, even if you're the husband. And quit hanging out with that Henry kid. He's too pale. And I don't care what you call them, those G.I. Joes of his are dolls. Don't draw rainbows or flowers or sunsets. I've seen you. Don't draw at all, no coloring books either. Put away your crayons, your Play-Doh, your Legos. Where are those Hot Wheels, your laser gun and handcuffs, those knives I gave you for Christmas? Never fly a kite or roller skate, but light all the firecrackers you want, kill all the lizards you can, cut up worms and feed them to that cat of yours. Don't sit Indian style with your legs crossed, you're no Indio. And stop click-clacking your sandal like some Tropicana chorus girl. And for God's sake, never, ever pee sitting down. I've seen you. Never take a bubble bath or wash your hair with shampoo. Shampoo is for women. So is conditioner, so is a mousse, so is hand lotion. Never file your nails or blow dry your hair. Go to the barber shop with your abuelo. You're not unisex, are you? Stay out of the kitchen. Los hombres don't cook, they eat. Eat anything you want, except deviled eggs, blow pops, croissants, bagels, maybe, cucumber sandwiches, and those petit fours. Don't watch Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie. Don't stare at the $6 million man. I've seen you. Never dance alone in your room. Donna Summer, Barry Manilow, The Captain, Anthony O, Bette Midler, and all musicals forbidden. Posters of kittens, Star Wars, or the Eiffel Tower forbidden. Those fancy books on architecture and art, I threw them in the trash. No, you can't wear cologne or puka shells, and I better not catch you in those clogs. If you grow a ponytail, I'm cutting it off. Okay? What? No, you can't pierce your ear, left or right side. I don't care. You will not look like a goddamn queer. I've seen you, even though I know you are one. Part of the message there, as my grandmother used to say, es mejor serlo y no parecerlo, que parecerlo y no serlo. It's very confusing. It's a tongue twister. But what that meant was, it is more honorable to actually be gay as long as you don't act gay, than to actually act gay even if you're not gay. So it's all, it's about the misogynistic sense of, well, not misogynistic, but the idea of femininity was the bigger crime was to be feminine, right? Not the actual sexuality. So anyway, in that quest for home, I eventually went to Cuba for the first time in 1997 or something like that. I was actually pretty old. I was 27 years old. Writing led me to sort of continue working on this story. In Cuba, you can imagine, it was an amazing experience. I say I returned because it almost felt like a returning because so much of it felt like, again, real and imagined world in my family, in my community. You can imagine meeting all that family that were just sort of pictures and all those landscapes and all those family stories come to life. It felt like a pop-up book of my life. Just came, my life became three-dimensional. And while it was a great experience, it was also sort of bittersweet because in a way I also realized that it's still sort of, you can't really have a relationship with that place, especially back in the 1990s. It's barely you can have a relationship with the island now. So I thought, well, that world is still sort of, I can't access that world completely. So I said, well, let's just move finally to, we'll finally move to America, little Ricky, And I took a hiatus from my engineering career and started teaching creative writing, and I moved to Hartford, Connecticut. And I thought, oh boy, sleigh rides in the snow, singing jingle bells in a one-horse hope and say. Some people got there. I didn't realize the lyrics of Jingle Bells till I was 35. Never quite hit me. And of course, that wasn't the New England, Martha Stewart doing arts and crafts. I was sure everybody still had those pilgrim shoes from the dittos in class. And of course, that wasn't the real New England. And so that was kind of, well, where is that in America? I thought, well, maybe home is someplace else. And I started traveling a lot since I had the summers off, always with that question of home. And thinking, well, maybe home is this undiscovered place. Maybe it's Barcelona, maybe it's London, maybe it's, I don't know, Kathmandu. What might it be? And that's where I started realizing more as an artist that, again, that this question of home is something fundamental to, it's primordial to human existence, right? I think we've been thinking about home ever since the first caveman said, that cave looks better. Let's move to that cave. And if you look at this idea of home, and this is where I feel like I'm telling my story as a Cuban American, but all artists also, what you're trying to do is base your work on some universal sort of shared humanity, and what is it that we all struggle with. So if you look at the idea of home, it's in all our traditions of faith. It's in our literature everywhere. It's in all our pop songs. This idea that in some ways, all of human endeavor is in some ways to get back home, right? If we take the story in the Judeo-Christian Bible about the lost paradise or the expulsion of paradise, in some ways that's a metaphor that we're all, whatever we're doing in life is in a way trying to become whole again. And in some ways art is that attempt to try to find that wholeness. Home as a physical place is part of that is part of that manifestation. It's just trying to become whole and complete. And I came across this quote by Pascal that sort of began to change my thinking again about home. And it says that the sole cause of a man's unhappiness is that he does not know how to stay quietly in his room. And I thought, what was that room I left? And I thought, maybe Miami is the only place where I belong, this place between two, maybe home is this place between these two imaginary worlds. That's the only place that's home for me. So I actually moved back to Miami after living in Brazil and Guatemala and Washington, D.C. Moved back to Miami and Connecticut, moved back to Miami thinking, yeah, I'm gonna just go back home. And this poem speaks to the idea of you can't go back home. What happened was, I took my partner, Mark, to Marco Island on the west coast of Florida. And it's a place we used to staycation all the time, poor man's vacation, like in July, for like $80 for the motel, for the week. And I took Mark back to sort of take that trip down memory lane, and it's part of my adolescence even, thinking nothing had changed. And of course, everything had changed. Let me take that off. I started cussing like a sailor in Spanish. Horny, you know, whatever. And Mark told me, like, you sound just like your mother. And I was like, my mother doesn't cuss that much. And I did realize that that's how my parents would talk about Cuba. And it's this inevitability, this sorrow, this longing, this loss of a place. Besides the politics, it's just a place you know you can't go back to anymore because of time. Things change and the world, you know, the lack of human agency, life and the world go on without you. And it's a very sad feeling, but it's also very, in a way, a very soothing feeling because you kind of let go of that idea that you have to attach yourself to things. Anyway, this poem takes place in that experience of going back to Marco Island. And I've realized that everybody in their life has a place like this in their life, where we were almost, if we think back, it did feel like that paradise when we were almost in paradise, when life felt complete and whole. And it might be an aunt's house, it might be a motel, it might be a grandma's house, someplace that becomes always this fixed point in our life of how we define happiness in some ways, or wholeness. So I invite you to think about your Gulf motel as I share mine with you. Looking for the Gulf Motel, Marco Island, Florida. There should be nothing here I don't remember. The Gulf Motel with mermaid lampposts and ship's wheel in the lobby should still be rising out of the sand like a cake decoration. My brother and I should still be pretending we don't know our parents, embarrassing us as they roll the luggage cart past the front desk, loaded with our scruffy suitcases, 24 loaves of Cuban bread, brown bags bulging with enough mangoes to last the entire week, our espresso pot, the pressure cooker, and a pork roast reeking garlic through the marble lobby. All because we can't afford to eat out, amigo. Not even on vacation. Only 2 hours from our home in Miami, but far enough away to be thrilled by the wider sands on the west coast of Florida, where I should still be for the first time watching the sun set instead of rise over the ocean. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My mother should still be in the kitchenette of the Gulf Motel, her daisy sandals from Kmart squeaking across the linoleum, still gorgeous in her teal swimsuit and amber earrings, stirring a pot of arroz con pollo, adding sprinkles of onion powder and dollops of tomato sauce. My father should still be in a terry cloth jacket, smoking, clinking a glass of amber whiskey in the sunset at the Gulf Motel, watching us dive into the pool, 2 sons he'll never see grow into men, who will be proud of him. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My brother and I should still be playing parcheesi. My father should still be alive, slow dancing with my mother on the sliding glass balcony of the Gulf Motel. No music, only the waves keeping time. A song only their minds hear 10,000 nights back to their life in Cuba. My mother's face should still be resting against his bare chest, like the moon resting on the sea. And the stars should still be turning around them. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My brother should still be 13, sneaking rum in the bathroom and sculpting naked women from sand. And I should still be 8 years old, dazzled by seashells and how many seconds I can hold my breath underwater. But I'm not. I'm 38, driving up Collier Boulevard, looking for the Gulf Motel, for everything that should still be, but isn't. I want to blame the condos, the shadows for ruining the beach and my past. I want to chase the snowbirds away with their tacky McMansions and yachts. I want to turn the golf courses back into mangroves. I want to find the Gulf Motel exactly as it was and pretend that for just a moment that nothing I've lost is lost. Miami didn't work out, so what's the natural thing? What do? Well, you move to Maine. You don't know the I-95 corridor probably on the west, because that's the other end of I-95, literally from Miami to the southernmost state on the continent to the northernmost state up there. I think it's further north than Washington. But in any case, there were some practical reasons why I moved up there. But I had sort of given up on that question of home in a way. I had given up and said, well, maybe my not feeling home is part of home. And that's just the way I'm going to feel my life. And I was kind of at ease here in Maine. That's my dog Joey. That's my partner Mark. By the way, we wear flannel all the time up there. These pictures were taken at different times, but it's very butch. My grandmother would be very proud. The two idiots from Miami living in Maine, like wearing flannel all day. The two gay idiots, right? And then that's me at my kitchen table writing the inaugural poem. That is, I live in a ski resort town, and that is, it's not me skiing. Unfortunately, I had some genetic tests done a few years ago, and apparently Cubans have a defective chromosome that doesn't let them ski. It's just impossible. It's a handicap, a genetic defect. In any case, so I was there sort of somewhat at peace, and then you know who called. And basically gave me the same assignment that I got in my first day of a writing class, which is write a poem about America, write a poem for America. And so all those questions of home got tossed up in the air again, because I had to ask some real serious questions. Was I American? As Americano as my parents think I was. You know, some part of me still felt that I needed to be Peter Brady or Marsha Brady or one of the Kardashians to be American, right? There's still some part that I felt, well, that's not really me. And the other thing was, do I even love this country? I mean, I kind of lived here, but I've never really had, do I love this country enough to write a poem? Because you can't fake honesty in a poem, right? And so, all those questions sort of went into what became the poem. And as I look back on the inauguration, on this poem, on writing the poem, on what I'm still experiencing, two important things surfaced. One was that indeed, this was my home, that this is my country, that home was in my backyard all the time, that the narrative of myself as a little chubby gay kid who grew up in the suburb of Miami, that is America. That my mother's story, a woman who grew up in a dirt floor in Cuba, that is America. As well as the millions of different kinds of lives and stories that we all bring. A narrative that of course hasn't been acknowledged for most of our history or swept under the rug, but nevertheless really part of what has made America, America. And I don't mean to say exclusively Latino, I mean all those great stories that we have, of who we are. And so that was really, aside from beating Beyonce, which is like, and him too, I guess, but that was really something that I took away from it. And something even more important is that I learned and still feel that America is a work in progress. It's just that narrative is still being written, and we just going through this election, we realize that, right? And we can't give up on that narrative. I mean, we have an incredible luxury in the world as compared to most of the countries out there. And it's our duty to continue to write that narrative, whether it's a word, a sentence, a chapter, a paragraph, whatever you do. And more importantly, even to write that narrative for those that can't write it yet. And that it is a work in progress, and it doesn't have to end in our lifetime. I always like the metaphor of the cathedral builders. You know, there were families, generations would work on these cathedrals and didn't even know what it was going to look like in the end. So I think I'm giving myself a pep talk today, but it is true. And I mean, if you really look at where we are today, and you see that almost. I'm starting to get a little sort of animated more because I see that this is a narrative and this is part of the story right now. And to negate it is also not part of a democracy, right? We have to think about that. But to fight for that, to change that narrative, is certainly something very American. Anyway, this is what's going on here. Yeah, that's where I was. So I'm sitting and I'm with my mom again, and I'm just going to read you a little prose of what's going on in my mind and then read the poem. And I think I'll close on that, but I will show you as I exit to go to over there. I'm going to leave a video up here. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. In the moment, I feel America standing as one, putting differences aside and taking a deep collective breath. We pay tribute to something far bigger and more important than any one of us. And I truly feel like one of us, one of we, the people, in the echoes of the president's and others' speeches. I embrace America in a way I never had or thought I could, feeling for the first time that I belong, truly belong, to one country. Not an imaginary ideal from TV or a nostalgic island floating in the sea of my parents' memories, but a real, tangible place that is mine, was mine, all along. I turn to my mother and whisper, "Mama, I think we're finally Americanos." Senator Schumer introduces me and calls me up to the podium. My mother squeezes my shoulder. I stand more confident than I imagined I would or could be, transfixed by the moment that is no longer about me or my poem or my glory, but about our country. Still, I'm surprised when the president and vice president stand up to greet me and shake my hand on the way to the podium. They both whisper something in my ear that I can't make out. But their gracious gestures speak silently to my heart, silently as if saying, "Richard, here is your country. This is your story. Here, your home." I step up to the podium, look out over the crowd, a patchwork quilt of lives, of stories spread across our ground, under our sky, beneath our one sun. I take it all in as I take one deep breath, then another. This is for them. This is for us, for all of us, I think to myself, and begin speaking into our wind. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, America, one today. One sun rose on us today, kindled over our shores, peeking over the Smokies, greeting the faces of the Great Lakes, spreading a simple truth across the Great Plains, then charging over the Rockies. One light, waking up rooftops, under each one a story, told by our silent gestures moving behind windows. My face, your face, millions of faces in morning's mirrors, each one yawning to life, crescendoing into our day. Pencil yellow school buses, the rhythm of traffic lights, fruit stands, apples, limes, and oranges, arrayed like rainbows, begging our praise. Silver trucks, heavy with oil or paper, bricks or milk, teeming over highways alongside us, on our way to clean tables, read ledgers, or save lives, to teach geometry or ring up groceries as my mother did for 20 years, so I could write this poem for us today. All of us, as vital as the one light we move through. The same light on blackboards with lessons for the day. Equations to solve, history to question, or atoms imagined. The I have a dream, we keep dreaming. Or the impossible vocabulary of sorrow that won't explain the empty desks of children marked absent today and forever. Many prayers, but one light breathing color into stained glass windows, life into the faces of bronze statues, warmth onto the steps of our museums and park benches as mothers watch their children slide into the day. One ground, our ground, rooting us to every stalk of corn, every head of wheat sown by sweat and hands. Hands gleaning coal or planting windmills in deserts and hilltops. Hands digging trenches, hands routing pipes and cables, hands as worn as my father's, cutting sugarcane, so my brother and I could have books and shoes. The dust of our farms and deserts, our cities and plains mingled by one wind, our breath. Breathe. Hear it through the day's gorgeous din of honking cabs, buses launching down avenues, the symphony of footsteps, guitars, and screeching subways, the unexpected songbird on your clothesline. Hear squeaky playgrounds, swings, trains whistling or whispers across cafe tables. Hear the doors we open for each other all day, saying, hello, shalom, bonjour, howdy, namaste, or buenos dias, in the language my mother taught me, in every language, spoken into one wind, carrying our lives without prejudice, as these words break from my lips. One skies as the Appalachians and Sierras claim their majesty, and the Mississippi and Colorado work their way to the sea. Thank the work of our hands, weaving steel into bridges, finishing one more report for the boss on time, stitching another wound or uniform. The first brushstroke on a portrait, or the last floor on the Freedom Tower jutting into a sky that yields to our resilience. One sky, toward which we sometimes lift our eyes, tired from work. Some days guessing at the weather of our lives. Some days giving thanks for a love that loves you back. Sometimes praising a mother when you have to give, or forgiving a father who couldn't give what you wanted. Still, we head home through the gloss of rain or weight of snow or the plum blush of dusk, but always, always home, always under one sky, our sky, and always one moon, like a silent drum tapping on every rooftop and every window of one country. All of us facing the stars and hope, a new constellation, waiting for us to map it, waiting for us to name it together. So I'm going to leave you with videos. I got to rush to the airport, but so I have some time to sign books if you'd like. So I'm just going to leave you with this video. It's a poem that was just published in the Boston Globe on Sunday, and my talented friend Nikki did a video around the poem, and it's an allegory about a garden, and of course the garden stands for democracy, how democracy works. And it's called Election Year, and it just, I think it speaks about many things, but it speaks about our roles and responsibility in tending that democracy and tending that garden, and how that garden sometimes is on weeds, sometimes doesn't have weeds, but that it's, in some ways it's a social construct is in a way an artifice that needs our hand in it, right? And I think the more people tend the garden, the more people involve themselves in the garden, the stronger a democracy. So yeah, I think that's it. Among many other little things in the poem, I think it deals with that. So I will turn it over to, you ready? Election year. The last ghostly patch of snow slips away. With it, winter's peaceful abandon melts into a memory, and you remember the mire of muck just outside your kitchen window is the garden you've struggled and promised to keep.
Jeans dyed black by years of dirt. You step into the ache of your boots again. Clear dead spoils trowel the soil for new life. The sun shifts on the horizon, lights up the dewed spiderwebs like chandeliers. Clouds begin sailing in, cargoed with rain loud enough to rouse the flower race for color. The rouge tulips clash with the noble lilies, flaunting their petals at the brazen puffs of alum. The mauve tongues of the iris gossip sweet nothings into the wind, trembling frail petunias. Mornings over coffee and news of the world, you catch the magic act of hummingbirds, appearing, disappearing, the eye tricked into seeing how the garden flowers thrive in shared soil, drink from the same rainfall, governed by one sun, yet grow divided in their beds where they've laid for years. In the ruts between bands of color, ragweed poke their dastard heads, dandelions cough their poison seeds, and thistles like daggers draw their spiny leaves and take hold. The garden loses ground, calls you to duty again. With worn gloves molded by the pole of your toil, and armed with shears, you tear into the weeds, snip head-bowed blooms, prop their struggling stems. Butterfly wings wink at you, hinting it's all a ruse, as you rest on your deck, proud of your calloused palms and pained knees, trusting all you've done is true enough to keep the garden abloom. But overnight, a vine you've never battled creeps out of the dark furrows, scales the long necks of the sunflowers, chokes every black-eyed Susan, and coils around the peonies, beheading them all. You snap apart its greedy tendrils, cast your hands back into the dirt, pull at its ruthless roots. Still, it returns with equal fury and claim. The red poppies scream, the blue asters gasp for air, strangled in its vile clasp that lives by killing everything it touches. The sun's eye closes behind mountains, but you lose sleep, uncertain if the garden is meant to inevitably survive or die, or if it matters one way or the other, with or without you. Maybe it's not just the garden you worry about, but something we call hope, pitted against despair, something we can only speak of by speaking to ourselves about flowers, weeds, and hummingbirds, spiders, vines, and a garden tended under a constitution of stars we must believe in, splayed across the sky.